This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Chinese President Xi Jinping attends a video summit on climate between China, France and Germany. Africa CDC seeks to reassure the continent not to worry about delays in second COVID-19 vaccine doses. And an artificial intelligence algorithm shows South Africa is not likely to see a third wave of COVID-19 infections at this time. Hello and thank you for joining us on Africa Live. I am Peninah Karibe and joining me with the business headlines is Uche.
Thanks, Peninah. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live, please. Nigeria plans to spend more than $1 billion to vaccinate its citizens against COVID-19. And China's economy grows 18.3% in a post-COVID comeback. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to Peninah.
Thank you, Uche. During a virtual summit, China's president has said the country will live up to its commitment to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. Xi Jinping spoke about ways to fight climate change with the French and German leaders. Guan Chao has the details.
Talks between Xi Jinping, Angela Merkel, and Emmanuel Macron focus on climate change ahead of a summit next week of 40 world leaders. In September, Xi Jinping told the 75th session of the UN General Assembly that China would step up its transition to low-carbon development and take more vigorous action to achieve a peak in CO2 emissions by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2060. At Friday's summit, Xi Jinping said China will live up to those targets. French President Macron said France wants to work with China to help with green development in developing countries. German Chancellor Angela Merkel stressed the three countries' role in tackling climate change and said her country would like to maintain communication on policies with China to help achieve targets. The three sides agreed on the need for multilateralism in the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Guan Chao, CGTN.
Meanwhile, the United States Climate Representative John Kerry is in Shanghai for talks with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. Kerry's three-day visit is seen as a way to test the waters ahead of President Joe Biden's virtual climate summit next week. Donald Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, but Biden has rejoined the deal. John Kerry is the first Biden administration official to visit China. He's also set to visit South Korea. The Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says that people who took their first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine have no reason to worry, even if their second jab is delayed. Head of the Africa CDC, Dr. John Nkengasong, said the health body is working to acquire more vaccines for the continent. Here's CGTN's Gurumchala with more.
Since COVID-19 vaccination has started rolling out, many in Africa have received their first dose but have no clue if they will get their second shots due to delivery delays, and people remain worried. Africa CDC Director John Nkengasong says there is no reason for any serious concern.
No reason to be worried. It's not like when you get vaccinated with the first shot, then after 8 weeks you don't get it, then your first shot was not useful. No, that is not how immunology works at all. I mean, the second dose, if you measure your immunology reactions, they really almost explode.
Africa lags behind with less than 14 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines administered. With a population of more than 1.3 billion, Africa banks on suppliers like AstraZeneca to do more. The Serum Institute of India manufactures the AstraZeneca jab. Unfortunately, India has temporarily suspended vaccine exports to meet its domestic demand. Africa, however, is demanding fair treatment.
I really want to believe that the government of India will lift those restrictions as soon as possible, given that you cannot, India is not an island. If you finish vaccinating your people before Africa or other parts of the world, you have not done yourself any justice, because variants will emerge and might undermine your own vaccination efforts in India. So I really want to be very sure that we don't. The narrative is that we don't know when vaccines, you get the second doses, but rather that India has put a restriction, and we are working to make sure that India lifts the restriction, and then the second doses will be distributed by COVAX across the continent.
African nations are also using bilateral means to secure as many vaccinations as possible from China and Russia. The African Union has already signed an agreement with Johnson & Johnson for the latter to deliver a total of 400 million doses of vaccines to the continent phase by phase. But even that plan is in jeopardy as J&J is facing investigations in the US due to rare blood clotting cases on people who took their vaccinations. Africa CDC hopes all will be cleared without affecting its millions of orders from Johnson & Johnson. Grumjara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
While Africa's efforts to address COVID-19 vaccine delays are now being further complicated by concerns over the Johnson & Johnson and the AstraZeneca jabs. Earlier, we spoke to Professor Ian Sane from South Africa's Wits University on how nations on the continent can prevent vaccine hesitancy and rejection following the suspension of the vaccine jabs in various countries.
J&J vaccine suspension has really only been undertaken with an abundance of caution. We became aware of the rare vaccine-induced thrombocytopenia thrombosis that has occurred in 6 cases in the United States and 4 cases in Europe. These are being investigated. This is, however, a rare occurrence occurring somewhere between 1 in 100,000 and 1 in a million of our vaccinees. It is a phenomenon that is known and understood with heparin-induced thrombocytopenia thrombosis. This is an abundance of caution, and these will not be on hold for very long. I think that the decisions to go ahead will be made very soon with changes in the information that is provided to potential vaccinees. My sense is that this is also not just a condition. The complications of thrombosis and various coagulation complications are not unique to AstraZeneca or Johnson & Johnson. In my view, they are occurring also with the mRNA vaccines. And so indeed, I think that we will need to understand how to deal with those complications, but we don't have much choice but to go ahead with the implementation of the various vaccines. In principle, the J&J vaccine is a single dose. I do think that the other vaccines will also come back online. There's a separate significant question around the use of various vaccines within with the various variants around the world. And indeed, we hope that in fact variant analyses will improve the situation at present. In South Africa, we are the Sisonke study, which is a phase 3B study in healthcare workers attempting to reach 500,000. We have completed 290,000 vaccinations. We are hoping to be back on track after adjustment of the protocol and the informed consent for potential participants. We're hoping to be back on track early next week.
South Africans have been anticipating the arrival of a third wave of COVID-19. However, an artificial intelligence-driven algorithm has predicted otherwise. The system was designed to alert authorities about any impending spike in infections that could give rise to a third wave. The AI algorithm system says there is currently a low risk of a third wave. CGTN's Travis Andrews has more with this report.
Since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, more than 1.5 million South Africans have contracted the virus. The COVID-19 second wave has been particularly costly, and many have lost their lives. Many were expecting a third wave of infections to be just as deadly, but an artificial intelligence-driven algorithm has downplayed the risk.
The risk of a third wave is small, meaning that we're not yet in a third wave. The early detection algorithms are basically about giving an alert to policymakers and the population as to whether there's something in the data that is compatible with a wave. So right now, we don't have a wave.
The algorithm was designed by experts at the University of Witwatersrand in partnership with the Temba Labs and other stakeholders within the government. Its analysis is said to be highly accurate, and other healthcare officials also concur that while the country remains vulnerable, the risk of a third wave remains low. The early detection system functions by predicting future daily confirmed cases based on historical data on South Africa's past infection rate.
The epidemiological picture, it's very complex and is driven by many parameters and is linked to many parameters and indexes. And you have to learn from the data. You have to use artificial intelligence through machine learning, because that's really the best tools in our arsenal to understand A, a complex problem with many parameters and many indexes, and B, extract parameters from the data.
Some experts believe that while the government may not rely solely on the algorithm, it does have an important role to play in the country's battle to mitigate the effects of the pandemic.
Obviously, we're in incredibly challenging times and a lot of gray area at the moment. And so any tool that a decision maker can use to help them make the best choice or help inform the best choice is a good thing. So this will just be one of many data points that a government official would look at to decide whether there's a need for a higher lockdown level.
The use of AI-driven algorithms may be a relatively new concept in South Africa's pandemic response, but some believe it may become more widespread. While the steady downward trajectory of COVID-19 infections has led to the same low-risk predictions by healthcare workers and the algorithm, super spreader events continue to make the country vulnerable to another massive spike. That's Andrew, CGTN, Cape Town.
Meanwhile, South Africans can now register online on the electronic vaccination data system to be scheduled for COVID-19 vaccination. The registration will initially open for people over 60, and the vaccines will be rolled out in 2 phases. In May and October, the online system is linked to the supply chain management system and will be used to track the availability of doses in specific regions. Angela Kupler has more.
Senior citizens can self-register online or opt for assisted registration at walk-in centres and vaccination sites.
There will be no distinction between private and state healthcare users, with the exception that private healthcare users will input their medical aid details. The quality of the service will be the same for all of us, and the system will assign a vaccination site closest to our homes where we work, not based on whether a particular site is a public or private facility.
There are a couple of issues facing authorities in their drive to vaccinate 67% of the population and reach that population immunity percentage needed to stop the spread of the pandemic.
I haven't planned it yet because they haven't rolled it out yet, but I've had COVID and I'm recovered, so I've got a few months to play with, I think, that I'm a little bit immune to it. I had COVID in December, but the symptoms weren't too bad, so I only went to test just to know.
There is a level of vaccination resistance that's beginning to emerge in South Africa.
I'm not so much desperately in favor of the vaccination program because I believe it also depends on your blood type, and some people just don't get it and some people are asymptomatic. I know some people get it worse than others, so if you want to be really safe, then you should vaccinate. But also you have to queue somewhere. And I don't know if they got enough vaccinations yet anyway.
There's an understanding that people susceptible to infections should take every precaution to protect themselves.
I think if you want to get vaccinated, you should be able to get vaccinated. But as I said, I'm a bit asymptomatic, so I'm not sure if I need it desperately, unless we have to have it to take airplane flights.
The registration website is live and receiving pre-registrations. Its developers say it's been tested to receive 3,000 registrations per second and can be doubled very quickly, which means that people over 60 years old can complete their registration. for those senior citizens who can't go online or choose not to go online, they're going to have to come into physical premises like these behind me and get registered, and then later on come and get that vaccine. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Many South Sudanese people in the capital, Juba, are welcoming the lifting of a lockdown the government imposed to try and control the spread of COVID-19. This week, South Sudan's government announced it was lifting restrictions it imposed in February. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
South Sudan's government says it lifted the lockdown because the number of people getting infected by the coronavirus in the country is reducing. It says by the time it imposed the lockdown in February, it was recording more than 100 new cases of COVID-19 daily. But it says that number is now below 20 people in a day. Many in the capital, Juba, are reacting to the lifting of the lockdown.
The lockdown was been long for a long time, whereby many of us, we lost our jobs, like those who are in the school, like young kids, like girls. Even some of them now, they got pregnant while it is because of the of lockdown. So these issues, if the government did not make this relief, so mean that all the ladies of South Sudan will end up their future.
Many people who survive inside the market, and most of these people, once they leave their houses, that's where they make their daily bread. But once, like I'm outside right now, I'm looking for what I can survive through. At the same time, the vaccine is already outside.
South Sudan launched a vaccination campaign on the 6th of this month, but so far is only vaccinating medical personnel. Healthcare workers are advising that residents should continue to observe protective measures against COVID-19.
There's simple things that always we appeal to people, or we are encourage the people that wearing the mask, washing your hands, using sanitizer, or a social distance, this is affecting not only you, but affecting the community and affecting the country as well.
The government is warning that if the number of cases of COVID-19 rises again, then it might impose another lockdown. But for many here, another lockdown may not be welcomed. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a short break. Coming up. Russia's Kremlin says President Putin to decide on counter-sanctions against Washington. And a Ghanaian company touts solar-powered fish freezers for vaccine rollout in West Africa's remote areas.
No one again, he can hold in guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
The Excellency, thank you very much for your time now. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Russia is weighing how to respond after the United States' latest sanctions. The Kremlin is considering counter-sanctions but did not elaborate. The U.S. announced on Thursday it was expelling 10 Russian diplomats and placing sanctions on 32 individuals and companies accused of interfering in last year's presidential election and launching a cyber attack on federal agencies. Moscow says it's ready to cooperate with Washington but called the latest moves unacceptable. A company headquartered in Ghana is piloting its solar-powered fridges and freezers in Senegalese and Ivorian fishing communities. The company's CEO, however, says it could be a useful tool in the continent's COVID-19 vaccination campaign. CGTN's Joy Kiruki Juma has more.
It takes a boat to deliver a freezer to fisherman Antone Fiani.
His home is located on an island in southern Côte d'Ivoire, which is not connected to the electricity grid. Fiani's freezer is solar-powered. The Coolbox freezer is an African solution that could have another use: storing vaccines. It was developed by Ghana-headquartered PEG Africa with people like Fiani in mind. It is an affordable way to store perishable items in remote and off-grid areas.
Some of the fish we smoke to conserve it longer, or we put ice on it so we can keep it for 2 or 3 days before delivering to market. Today, the cost of buying the ice is a bit high, so we're looking at working with a solar-powered freezer.
Today, Fiani can store his catch for at least 10 days before taking it to the market. He and his wife pay for the Coolbox in regular installments. Fiani is using his freezer to store fish. However, PEG Africa CEO for Côte d'Ivoire, Terry Adonis, says such cold chain technology is particularly important amid the global health crisis.
If the relevant departments and the health ministries don't follow this cold chain logic, then clearly people living in the more remote areas will not have access to the vaccine.
PEG Africa is currently piloting the solar-powered fridges and freezers in Ivorian and Senegalese fishing communities. With funding from other partners, PEG has also started providing solar power systems for off-grid health centers. Global health journal Science in Practice puts at nearly 60% the number of healthcare facilities in sub-Saharan Africa that have no access to electricity. This means the Coolbox could be a useful tool to ensure more of the population gets protected. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
Apart from the Boko Haram insurgency, Nigeria is currently battling a wave of kidnappings and banditry, which authorities are struggling to deal with. But a Nigerian artificial intelligence firm is touting technology it says will fight kidnapping and banditry anywhere in the country by tracking suspects involved. CGTN's Deji Badmans has that story.
Kidnappings in Nigeria have become a huge problem that the government is yet to fully tackle. The problem is especially prevalent in the north of the country, and bandits not only target individuals, they've been increasingly attacking schools and abducting many students. But a local artificial intelligence firm in the city of Ibadan in Oyo State, southwest Nigeria, believes it has a solution to Nigeria's kidnappings problem. Robotics and Artificial Intelligence Nigeria, or RAIN for short, is a pioneer Nigerian indigenous robotics firm. And its founder, Olushola Ayola, says he's created a specialized drone tracker that could track and locate kidnappers and bandits.
Today, the military or the police are using drones to just check if they can see footpaths and then follow the footpaths. How about when those footpaths lead into a cave? How about when those footpaths lead into a canopy in a forest? How do you track the rest of the movement from there? We have a different solution, a different approach. We're not using cameras. You can use cameras just to map your environment, but we're not using cameras to track bandits. We are using a different kind of sensor, and it's the carbon emission sensor. You can't escape it.
Bandits often use remote forests as their hideouts and launching ground to stage attacks. Ayola says with his carbon emission detection tracker mounted on a drone, kidnappers and bandits have no chance of escape due to the carbon dioxide they emit.
If you have 100 kidnapped students in your locality, in your cave, they're going to all breathe out carbon dioxide. When you have all of them there, you need to feed them, you need to cook for them. You need to transport them from one location to another, so bikes and all of those, petrol and all of that, generating sets and so on. So there's no hiding, really, if we are tracking your carbon emissions. You can't hide from it. And in a forested area, there's a threshold for what carbon emissions should be if there are no human activities there. So any spike that is noticed higher than the expected in a forested area signifies location of human beings there.
The Nigerian government has not yet assessed Ayola's innovation, but security experts say it's a welcome development and should be given a try.
We're faced with a situation where we're dealing with targets that are difficult to penetrate, such as the ungoverned spaces, the forest. So technology will be not only a force multiplier, but it would definitely help in clarifying some of the challenges that the Nigerian security architecture is currently encountered with. If, for instance, the technology is adaptable and you can create convergence between what the technology is creating and the existing platforms that the Nigerian security are using, then yes, it can be a win-win for everyone.
The tracker is ready. The only problem is that we can't deploy it privately. You cannot deploy a drone unless you are working for a security agency. So let's say the military came to us and said, deploy this to, let's give it a test. Then they would have the license to fly a drone across states, across areas like that. So it's something that can only come to life when those whose responsibility it is request to deploy them.
For now, Ayola and his team are waiting for the government to put their innovation to test. It just might be the game changer in Nigeria's fight against kidnappings and banditry. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Ibadan, Nigeria.
Kenya has increased the drilling of geothermal wells in its Rift Valley region as it seeks to add more output to the 1,000 megawatts it already harnesses from the Earth's crust. CGTN's Enoch Sikolia looks at the country's geothermal power potential and how it plans to go green in its energy sourcing.
Meet Dr. Anthony Wanyama, a geologist with Kenya's geothermal company atop a ridge in Menengai caldera. Staring down towards the steaming landscape, he has a clear view of Kenya's natural beauty and a key plank of the country's industrial future. He watches plumes of steam rise from a newly completed well. Besides him are meandering stalks of newly installed pipes that will be carrying boiling hot water and steam from wells that were drilled deep into the volcanic terrain. These green pipes are an indicator that a power plant will be constructed here to generate energy for use by millions of Kenyans. Among items to be installed are steam-powered turbines able to generate 70 megawatts each and transformers to set up the voltage of the electricity being injected into the national power grid.
You can see here a number about over 50 wells have been drilled here using Kenya-owned rigs.
It is estimated that the caldera has the potential of dishing out over 1,000 megawatts of electricity.
A megawatt can power about 800 homes. So you can imagine how many homes can be powered with 1,000 megawatts.
The East African country has been investing heavily in geothermal power generation, which supplies low-cost, low-emissions energy. The government's initial goal was to ensure universal access to electricity by the year 2020. Even though that vision was not achieved, Kenya has made great strides in geothermal power generation and development. Kenya has the potential to generate 10,000 megawatts of energy from Mother Nature using geothermal sources. Most of it is located along the Great Rift Valley.
Now, this is the Menengai caldera. It's part of the Great Rift here in Kenya. Now, the Kenyan government has continued to tap into such resources, the steam that is found in the volcanic rift, for green energy.
Currently, I can say we are doing about 1,000 megawatts of the 10,000 megawatts. I mean, it's at 110.
Over 120 kilometers from Menengai, workers from the Geothermal Development Company are busy drilling wells. The area is called Silale Hills and has a potential to generate 3,000 megawatts of electricity. Drilling is an art. These workers are toiling day and night to ensure the resource that lies underneath is fully tapped. Exploration to identify more fields began earlier this year.
So we do exploration, we do productive well to check whether the viability, how is it? It's like water. I mean, sometimes you say there is water inside here, but you drill, you don't get the water. So it's the same. So, and you go almost 5 kilometers.
The country's first geothermal power plant was set up at Olkaria in Naivasha, Kenya. Currently, Kenya supplies energy to only a third of the country's population. But according to Energy Minister Charles Keter, If Kenya's geothermal potential is harnessed, almost every Kenyan will be connected with power. Enoch Sikoli, CGTN, Nakuru, Kenya.
Egypt's government has applied various restrictions for the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. It has suspended late-night prayers and seclusions in mosques, as well as charity banquets, funerals and weddings. The hours for Taraweeh prayers, which take place after sunset, have been significantly reduced. However, as Yasser Akim reports, mosques are still open for the main prayers.
For the second year running, Egyptians spend the month of Ramadan amid COVID-19 health measures. But unlike last year, mosques have been opened for daily prayers this time around, and worshippers have been allowed to congregate for the first Friday prayers of the month.
Today is a day of joy, of celebrations and thanks to Allah during the Friday prayers in mosques. We are optimistic and always pray that we don't have to go through this ordeal again.
Worshippers are obliged to wear masks, maintain social distancing, and bring their own prayer mats. Meanwhile, the mosques are continually being sanitized.
It's a good decision. I agree with it. People enjoy performing these holy rituals. They put you in the spirit of Ramadan with Friday prayers and their Taraweeh. Suspending it lately because of the coronavirus had a negative impact.
Officials say Egypt could be on the verge of a third wave of coronavirus, with daily cases close to 900. The government has warned it could shut down mosques again if the number of COVID cases keep rising. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Let's now catch up with the day's business news. We cross over to Uche for the latest.
Thank you, Peninah. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Nigeria plans to spend more than $1 billion to vaccinate its citizens against COVID-19. And China's economy grows 18.3% in a post-COVID comeback.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Well, let's start off in Nigeria, where the government has set aside an estimated $1.4 billion to fund the inoculation of its citizens against COVID-19. Now, the allocation is also expected to reduce as the nation receives more donations from international donors and the private sector. Recently, health authorities have called for a halt in the ongoing vaccination exercise across the nation due to a shortage of a vaccine supply. Of course, Nigeria received a donation of 3.94 million doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine back in March. That, of course, barely enough to vaccinate about 1% of the country's 200 million strong population. Now, more than a year into the COVID-19 pandemic, some governments are calling for the introduction of a digital vaccine passport in order to jumpstart the aviation and hospitality industries. Of course, Africa lags behind most regions in vaccinations, and a number of nations, including South Africa, are at risk of a third wave of the virus. And while people are beginning to travel again for work and leisure, there is still fear developing nations will be left behind amid calls for the adoption of these vaccine passports. Here's Sumitra Naidu reporting.
Talks of vaccination passports are already underway in most European countries, a conversation that South Africa can't engage in at this stage. Out of 168 countries that have begun administering the COVID-19 vaccine, South Africa places 79 on the list after vaccinating just 0.5% of the population. If the country continues at this pace, it could take 10 years before 75% of the population is vaccinated.
What we're waiting for is to get a large batch of vaccines so we can start to vaccinate a large number of people. Right now we haven't even started. We just at the essential workers that are within the healthcare.
The vaccination rollout has been dealt another blow. The health ministry here has decided to stop the process for now after more reports of blood clotting in people overseas that received the vaccine. The government is heading up this rollout and prefers to be cautious, so no other vaccines will be administered privately. The health ministry also wants to ensure everyone is treated fairly in getting a vaccine.
So from the domestic side, we still need to think about it very carefully and make sure that we comply with the Constitution and to make sure that it's fair, because if you go and say that you're going to have a vaccine passport, but you don't have parity in terms of the distribution of vaccine from urban area to rural area, how do we deal with it constitutionally? And also, how do we deal with it if other people don't want to have this vaccine?
The tourism industry has reopened to local and international visitors, but 120 countries have placed restrictions on travelers from South Africa. This is because the 501Y variant was discovered here last year.
That's why I talk about the issue of parity. It will create a two-tier system. So again, to not have a two-tier system for us going outward is to make sure that there's enough vaccine for everyone. Internationally, already now, it has created an imbalance because rich countries and those that have developed their own vaccines that have been proven to be effective, have already started vaccinating, their citizens.
The vaccine passport may be an easy option for those countries with money. African countries without financial muscle may be left behind.
The global rollout is going to take anywhere from 12 to 30 months, according to the health experts. And therefore, we cannot have a global standard if there isn't equal and equitable access to vaccines.
Governments are desperately trying to get their nations back to normality, but are treading cautiously. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, China says its economy grew 18.3% in the first quarter. The figure marks a sharp recovery from the same time last year when the country was effectively stalled by the coronavirus pandemic. Now, the latest numbers were unveiled by officials in a news conference. Here's Wang Mingjie with more.
In the first quarter, the spokesperson said the national economy made a good start. Faced with the test of COVID-19 during winter and spring and the uncertainties of the external environment, efforts made by all regions and departments continue to deliver results. The economy delivered a stable performance with a consolidated foundation and a good momentum of growth. Production demand was expanded and market vitality was enhanced. Employment and prices were stable and people's well-being was strongly guaranteed. In the first quarter, the gross domestic product reached over 24 trillion yuan, up by over 18% year-on-year, or up by 0.6% over that in the fourth quarter of 2020. The spokesperson explained that it was affected by such incomparable factors as a low base figure of last year, an increase of working days due to staff staying put during the Spring Festival. The spokesperson also briefed some points like the overall agricultural production was steady and peak production recovered significantly. The industry production rebounded steadily, and the manufacturing industry also demonstrated a strong momentum of growth. And the market sales improved gradually, and online retail sales grew rapidly. residents' income continued to rise, and income growth of rural residents outpaced that of urban residents. But the spokesperson also said we must be aware that the virus is still spreading globally, and the international landscape is complicated with huge uncertainties and instabilities. At the next stage, the spokesperson said more efforts need to be made to promote the quality development of the economy in a solid way.
Meanwhile, UN Deputy Secretary General Peninah Mohammed has raised concern that COVID-19 is leading to an even more unequal world for millions in developing nations. Now, she's instead called on all governments to finance equitable vaccination for all as a matter of urgency. Now, Mohammed spoke during the closing session of the 2021 Financing for Development Forum in New York.
The diverging world that we are hurtling towards is a catastrophe for all of us. It is both morally right and economically rational to help developing countries overcome this crisis. While the efforts made so far to support the most vulnerable are welcome, they remain insufficient to avoid the risk of a lost decade of development. Extraordinary measures continue to be critical to keep vulnerable economies afloat. We also need structural transformations to protect the global economy against future crises and to secure a brighter future for all.
And moving on now, French President Emmanuel Macron wants to see a green recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. And with just over a year to go until the next presidential election, his administration is looking to show its commitment to sustainable development. Ross Cullen visits a wind farm in eastern France to find out how.
The winds of green change are blowing in France, turbines spinning in the late winter sun. Symbols of a growing renewable energy landscape.
I remember when I was a young kid, I used to watch some movies or even some, anime where there were wind turbines, and it was looking like the future.
Olivier Texier is the director of engineering for a Chinese company operating the wind turbines here, 160 kilometers to the east of Paris. The turbines more or less run themselves. They can assess whether the wind is strong enough to spin or too powerful to be able to operate safely, and they can change to face the direction and angle of the gusts. A wind turbine like this can provide enough electricity to power a small village, equivalent to the annual energy usage of around 12,000 people. A team of engineers monitors the output of the farm, troubleshooting if necessary.
I can see where we are. We have always local people either working for us, either working with us in the company. And that's really a typical thing of green energy, since you have PV panel, wind farm everywhere over the territory. It means you have employment everywhere in the territory. And that, I think, is a great advantage for this industry.
Chinese companies like CGTN Europe Energy bring experience in renewable power to the development of wind farm projects across Europe. China is one of the world's biggest producers of carbon emissions, but it also makes more than 70% of all solar panels and half the world's electric vehicles.
We believe that for our sustainable development, we should have some new resource of the energy, including wind power and solar power and some other types of the energies. And all these can change our energy diversity. This can help us to have a bright future.
The International Climate Agreement in 2015 was signed in France, and the government is keen to showcase the country as a model of green policies. But some critics of the government say the greening of the economy is too slow, while others challenge the investment in wind turbines.
There is a conflict over the use of inland wind turbines with people who want to conserve the countryside and tourism, so there is a contradiction between the development of wind turbines and other economic activity. It's an unresolved problem because there is a very significant movement against wind turbines here in France.
To meet European objectives, renewable energy must account for more than a third of primary energy consumption by 2030. The French energy model is not as carbon intensive as the UK or Germany, thanks to the nuclear industry. While the French government supports the sector, it also wants to cut its reliance on nuclear energy by 2035.
It's not the interest of the main nuclear producer to see competition coming with renewable and cheaper energy. And that's the paradox and the dilemma the government is facing every day.
Back in the countryside, the landscape is changing. Many landowners now see more economic benefit and political will in green projects rather than traditional rural industries. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Troyes, Eastern France.
And that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but still to come on Global Business Africa, we'll be looking at how the coronavirus pandemic dented trade in Africa after a report shows that it dipped by 11.9% in 2020. Of course, all that coming up atop of the hour. For now, back to you, Peninah.
Thank you, Uche. You're watching Africa Live. Coming up in sports. More women taking up skating through Girls Skate South Africa.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Peninah, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference. How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born